Hey guys, today we're going to be looking at a game that I played against National Master Kevin Yang from a rapid tournament at USC this past spring. So I had the white pieces in this game and I started off with e4, black played c6, d4, and d5. So here we have a Caro-Kann defense. I chose this variation with knight c3, d takes e4 was played, and knight takes e4. Here black has a few moves like bishop f5 or knight gf6, but knight d7 was chosen by black. There's a few things to note here. I played the move knight f3, but there are some other moves. The first thing I'll cover is if queen e2. This move is really not that good, but it does have one threat that it's after knight f6, white can play the move knight d6, which would be mate because of the pin. But obviously a move like e6 stops this, but queen e2 is just good to know. Another thing to note is the more important move, which is knight to g5. The point of knight g5 is that it looks like you're just putting this knight out into the middle of nowhere. However, if black tries to kick it away with h6, we have the move knight e6 in this position. The point of knight e6 is that if black takes on e6 with the pawn, we have queen h5 mate, or queen h5 check, and then g6, and then mate. And if black moves the queen, we simply take on f8, and white will have a small advantage because of the two bishops and the fact that the knights on g8 and f8 look a bit awkward here. Note that if black tries queen a5 check to try and win the knight outright, bishop d2 is a good response because it attacks the queen, and after queen b6, we have the same thing with knight takes f8. If black tries knight f6 instead, we have the move bishop d3. The point is here, if h6 is played, you can still go knight e6, because even though the h5 square is covered by the knight, bishop g6 is mate here. So it's going to be the same thing. If queen b6 or queen a5, bishop d2, and then queen b6, we have knight takes f8, and white is for choice here. So after the move knight g5 and then knight f6, bishop d3, and then here black would probably play e6, and then it's just a normal game. But these are all good moves to note. I played the move knight f3 instead of knight g5, so not going into that variation. But here black played knight gf6, bishop d3. We traded on e4, and then black played knight f6. After knight f6, I played bishop d3, bringing my bishop back to the d3 square, and bishop g4 was played. So the point of bishop g4 is to pin my knight to the queen. So if I play a move like castles in the future or now, black can play the move bishop takes f3, queen takes f3, and then queen takes d4, either in this position or potentially later. So to prevent any of this, I played the move c3 to defend this pawn with my c3 pawn. Here black played queen d5. And this threatens to take on f3 and double my pawns. So once again, if I castle, then bishop takes f3, queen takes f3, queen takes f3, and g takes f3 can be played. And this would just double my pawns. So I really don't want this to happen. So I played the move bishop e2 instead to sort of safeguard this and get out of the pin. And here black played the move g6, which I thought was an inaccuracy. The reason I thought g6 was bad is because it takes away the g6 square for the bishop. So here black has my knight pinned, and ideally, if they play something like e6, and I go h3 to kick this bishop, they want to keep the bishop on this sort of line where it pins the knight. So bishop h5 would be a good move here. And if I try and kick this bishop and break the pin, then the bishop can simply retreat back to g6, and they've retained the bishop pair, and this h3 and g4 moves have been a bit committal here. Now my king doesn't really want to go to the king side because I've opened up this area of the board. So I would have to deal with this pin in other ways. The problem is that when black goes g6 instead of e6, g6 here, I played h3 in the game. And here if bishop h5 is played, then g4 would trap this bishop because it can't retreat to g6. So here black would be forced to play knight takes g4, h takes g4, bishop takes g4, and black would go down a piece and be losing already in this position. So after h3 was played, Black could play bishop f5 or retreat the bishop to another square, but that also comes with some problems because then the queen looks a bit vulnerable on d5. So bishop takes f3 and bishop takes f3 was played. So I got the bishop pair in this position, which I thought was a something that would give me a slight advantage here. But I thought that Black's next move was a bit questionable. Here he played the move queen e6 check. I much prefer bringing the queen back to a square like d6 or d7. The problem with queen e6 is that I have two responses that are quite good. Actually, maybe even three. Maybe king f1 is playable and like castling by hand. But castling by hand means like literally just like castling without actually doing the castling in one move. But what I could have played here was the move queen e2. I settled on bishop e2 instead, and I'll explain why after I explain queen e2. So if I go queen e2, we kind of force a trade of queens, and then in this queenless middle game / endgame, I feel like I have good chances because, once again, I have the bishop pair, and also this king in the center is pretty useful in this queenless middle game. Like, I don't really need to have the king tucked away, like castling short. So after queen e6, I could have played queen e2, but here I chose the move bishop e2, which I thought was also good. The point is that, well, I'll show it in the game here, after bishop g7, I can castle, and I want to get this rook to e1 as fast as possible so that I can open up some discoveries on this queen, and also it's good to have this rook on this semi-open e-file. Remember, an open file is a file with no pawns on it, and a semi-open file is a file with one pawn on it. So I castled, Black castled, and I played rook e1. So getting ready for some discoveries, Black chose to get out of the way with the move queen d6, so I simply developed my pieces. I played queen b3, attacking this b7 pawn. b6 was played in response, and I played bishop f3. So bishop f3 attacks this c6 pawn, and it also puts this bishop on this very nice diagonal. And one of the good things about having this bishop is that it's unopposed, right? I have the bishop pair, which means I have two bishops, and here Black only has one, which means that I have the unopposed bishop, which is the bishop on f3. So there is no light squared bishop to contest it. And after bishop f3, I had this idea of going g3 and then playing bishop f4, and really like using these bishops on these two diagonals, the sort of h2 to b8 diagonal and the h1 to a8 diagonal. So rook a c8 was played here, just safeguarding this pawn, and I played g3. So getting ready for bishop f4. Black saw this coming and played queen d7, which sort of retreats the queen back, but also eyes this h3 pawn. So I played bishop g2 to defend it. e6 was played, and here I played the move a4. So I like the move a4 because I'm sort of threatening to go a5 and try and chip away at the queen side. Because I have the two bishops, I really want to just open up this position. And if I open up the a file as well, my rook will come to life, and Black's queen side will seem pretty vulnerable here. So after a4, Black played c5, and here I thought this was a mistake, but I don't really blame him for it. If you do nothing, then I'm simply going to go a5 and try and chip away at the queen side. And this is one of those positions where maybe Black can try and hope to equalize, but it's hard to imagine a scenario where if they just sit, that Black will be better, because the two bishops are quite strong in this position, and it's one of those scenarios where it's like, do you just want to sit around and hope to hold on, or do you want to try and get some counterplay? So that's what Black chose to do. He chose c5. Kevin played c5 in this position, but I think that overall, in terms of like an objective evaluation of the position, c5 is bad. The reason is that after I played d takes c5, he has two options to recapture the pawn. So he can play either rook takes c5, or he can play b takes c5, which he did in the game. So first, let's cover rook takes c5. So this sort of keeps these two pawns together, but after bishop e3, you start to realize that Black's position is really kind of falling apart after a few moves. So you don't want to keep this rook on the fifth rank, because if you play like rook a5, it's almost getting close to being trapped. So let's say you go back to c8. Then after I go a5, suddenly this position has completely opened up in my favor. So the first thing to note is that I'm threatening to just take on b6, and I have a lot of attackers on it. So if you take on a5, then I really hammer this a7 pawn with a bunch of attackers, all on this a7 pawn, which is just lonely here on the queen side. After the a7 pawn is captured, then I'll have this two pawn majority, which will be uncontested because they'll have no pawns. So black really doesn't want to do that and open up this position. Unfortunately, if you try and avoid this with something like b5, I'll have moves like a6. A6, the point is that I want to like put this bishop on b7, really stick it on this square where it disconnects the queen from the defense of the a7 pawn. And after, let's say, a move like, I'll just play a random move like rook d8, bishop b7, rook b8, then this a7 pawn is a goner. And then white's completely winning here. So this is like the benefit of chipping away at the queen side and having these two bishops really show their strength on this side of the board. So after bishop e3, this would be pretty tough to defend. Black would probably maybe even just be forced to go down a pawn on some of these lines, because it doesn't really look like it's that bad, but as soon as you play a5, you start to realize that this whole queen side is kind of collapsing eventually. So after bishop e3, yeah, that would be pretty bad. So instead he played b takes c5. The problem with this move, however, is that it really goes to show the concept of pawn islands, where now black has these two pawn islands over here instead of one, where they're separated. And here I chose to attack this pawn by going rook d1. Sorry, I played rook d1 first to get this queen off the d line. And after queen c7 was played, I played the move queen c4. I thought this move was good because here black might be thinking about going c4 themselves. And if that's played, it could sort of like hinder my three pawns over here. If c4 is played, then they could put a lot of pressure on the b2 pawn in the future. So I played queen c4 to stop this. And also it prevents black from moving some of the pieces that they want to get out of here. So for example, if black tries to move, like let's say like rook b8 to try and put pressure on the b2 pawn and stop my bishop from moving, I don't think I should go bishop f4 here because e5 can be played. But what I can do is I can actually play b4. And this sort of exploits this pin because now that the rook is moved, the queen's unprotected. And b4 can be played. And then I can either threaten to take on c5 or play b5 in the future. So that's the benefit to b4. So after queen c4, black played the move knight d7, and I played queen b5. Queen b5 is just inching the queen closer so that I'm attacking this knight now. And this sort of prevents the knight from, prevents black from moving like rook b8 or trying to develop normally because they have to address this issue with the knight. And if the knight moves back, they've sort of wasted a tempo. And if the knight moves to square like e5, for example, it can sort of be bullied by moves like bishop f4 or f4, or I could just play bishop e3. And then this knight is sort of unstable in the square. It doesn't have a really nice outpost yet. So after queen b5, black could actually defend the knight with rook d8, but this comes with problems with moves like bishop to g5, attacking this rook, which would cause black to further compromise their position with moves like f6, stuff like that. So he didn't really want to do that. In the game, Kevin played the move knight f6, simply retreating his knight back, and I played the move bishop e3. I thought bishop e3 was good. I thought it was better than bishop f4 because this move attacks the c5 pawn, and once again it prevents black from moving their pieces. So my queen can't be kicked out just yet because I'll take on c5, and there's no time to take this pawn on b2 because I'm attacking this rook on f8. So after bishop e3, black played rook fd8. So instead of rook b8, rook fd8, and I played a5 here. The point of a5 is that I basically want to get my pawn to a6, and then once again I want to anchor my bishop on b7, which will disconnect the queen from the a7 pawn, which I can target later with this e3 bishop. So I played a5 here, and to show the point, I played black played rook takes d1, and then bishop f8, and then here I played a6. And this is sort of the beginning of my plan, which is to go bishop e7, and then here I can show like some random lines. So if h5, I can play bishop e7, rook b8, and then b4. And I'm sort of attacking this pawn. And if this pawn ever takes, then I can take on a7, and it's pretty much over for black here. And if not, I'm simply going to like try and attack this pawn with more pieces. And then once I win it, black's position pretty much collapses. This a6 and bishop on b7 combination is very deadly in a position like this. So after I played a6, black decided that he can't really let my bishop get to b7, so he tried a pawn sacrifice with the move knight d5. So after knight d5, I actually thought about playing rook takes d5 for a while, just to keep the bishop, the light squared bishop, but I ultimately settled on just winning a pawn with bishop takes d5, e takes d5, and rook takes d5. And here it's one of those positions where I'm up a pawn now, but I have lost probably my greatest asset, which is the light squared bishop. So it's time to be very precise with converting because I do have some loose pawns. And if I get into like a certain types of endings, my extra pawn wouldn't be that useful. It could be like more drawish. So I had to be precise here. So after rook takes d5, black played the move rook b8. This is an example of sort of being precise. So I have a few moves here. The point of rook b8 is to attack my queen, and if the queen moves, my b2 pawn is undefended. So there's two ways I could go about this. The first is I could play the move queen e2. After queen e2, I'm moving the queen out of the way, and I'm defending my b2 pawn. However, I didn't really like this move because black has several options with moves like queen c6 or queen a5 or even queen b6. So after a move like queen a5, then you can start to see how like queen a1 is a threat, maybe rook b6 is a threat, picking up this loose pawn, and then this position is still better for me for sure, but it's kind of unclear really. So instead, I chose the move queen d7, and the point of queen d7 is this, that in order to win this b2 pawn, you have to trade the queens first. But then after rook takes b2, rook takes a7, I feel like this a pawn is a lot stronger than the extra pawn I would have had if I went queen e2 and tried to keep everything together. This a pawn is dangerously close to queening, and I feel like black's pieces are simply too passive here, and there's too many weaknesses to the point where I could simply like just bring the king over and really just attack this rook, try and find a way to promote this a pawn. I feel like this position is one of those where it's probably just winning outright, just moving the rook, advancing the pawn, and then figuring out a way to queen this pawn. So instead of trading the queens, black played the move queen b6. After queen b6, they're attacking this b2 pawn, and they're attacking this a pawn. So it looks like black's going to come out on top here, or at least win a pawn back. But after the move bishop f4, you start to see that black's actually losing. And that's the good thing about queen d7. After bishop f4, it's hard to find a good square for this rook to go to. You can't go to b7, obviously, because it'll just get captured. And c8, d8, and e8 are all out of the question because my queen protects those squares. So the only square that is available is the a8 square. However, after the move queen b7, it's just very difficult to play with black here. So queen b7 does two things. It attacks this rook, which is the most important thing, obviously. It also attacks this queen. So notice that there's a few ways to get around it. One is you trade the queens. The problem with trading the queens is that now this pawn is an absolute monster, and the b8 square is covered by my bishop. So I would just queen here, and then we would be up a rook and just win. You really have to defend this rook because the queen is defended. So you have to do something with the rook. So there's no way to move the queen to defend this rook because the move queen d8 would just be captured by the rook. So the last alternative is to move the rook. If you move the rook to e8, then queen takes b6 will be played. After a takes b6, we've suddenly opened up this a file for the pawn to run. And after a7, the next move will be bishop b8, pretty much no matter what. If black tries to defend this pawn, stop the pawn from queening, then bishop b8 essentially like entombs this rook on the a8 square. Black will be playing without a rook basically, and then this will be an easy conversion. I think I can just bring my king all the way to the a6 square and then b7 and just win because the pieces are just too active here. If you want to keep fighting a little longer, I think rook e1 check and then rook a1 might keep the game going a little bit longer, but either rook g7 or bishop b8 should be enough here. And then the pawn is way too close to queening. So after queen b7, there's really only one thing. Sorry, the board just flipped up. There's only one thing you can do, which is to play rook e8 and then try and hold this position. But in this position, after I played a7, black decided to resign because there's really no way to hold this. I mean, the best try, like I said, was bringing the rook around. But even that, after bishop b8, especially in this position, like if the rook gets entombed, it's over. But even after rook e1 and rook a1, this pawn is just way too close to queening, and there's really no hope for black here. So in this position, after we traded the queens, after the rook moved to e8 and we traded the queens, black resigned. And I thought this game was pretty instructive because it wasn't one of those games where I launched like an all-out attack or I found some like amazing tactic. It was pretty simple chess, and it just showed like how you can take a small advantage with the bishop pair in a position. and sort of just play good, but not moves that are like insanely flashy or anything, and just sort of work a small advantage and increase that advantage to the point where eventually it comes, it leads to a decisive result. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you guys learned something from this game. I haven't posted a video in around 6 to 7 months now, and it's because I've been busy with school, but hopefully now I'll get more videos out because it's summer break and I have a lot more free time. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video and learned something, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care.